Kia ora mai tātou katoa. We're going to sit here now, just a bit more comfy. So hopefully everyone can see. So firstly, thank you, Sandy, for allowing me to pick your brains and to pick through your house and pick all your artworks up. And all of our lenders who have allowed us to pick up works from their houses as well. So Huia, Yonke, Helen Kedgley, Eric and Edina Tamepo. Everybody, if there's too many to name here, but thank you all. This talk, I wanted to actually talk about Sandy's paintings. When you read back through a lot of the scholarship written about Sandy's work, a lot of it ends up being around these histories that are around Sandy. So we have, if we go back to the Headlands exhibitions in 1982 at the Museum of Contemporary Art, that whole kind of project ended up being about how great Colin McCann was, how Gordon Walters was being accused of cultural appropriation, and you had all these other conversations. And we didn't actually hear a lot about Sandy's artwork. And then we have other exhibitions where Sandy, being the man he is, will talk about his students and his projects and education, MASPAC, Toi Māori, all of these other areas of mahi that you've worked in. And I wanted to take an opportunity to talk about your mahi, about your actual paintings. But feel free to challenge me and change the topic as we go. And a lot of this corridor is kind of loosely based on the interviews that I've been doing with you for the publication.
Half of it was lies.
And also the publication will be launched at Te Papa. It's being printed at the moment. So I also want to acknowledge Bob, Yonke, Nigel Burrell, Elizabeth Ellis, David Butts, Tina Kukana and Nigel Burrell who have contributed to that publication. So this is where I've decided to start this corridor, is with this man here. Can we bring that up on the main screens? Pene Taipa. I think Pene Taipa is somebody that hasn't been acknowledged enough in New Zealand art history.
Absolutely.
For the contribution that he's made to that history.
Continuation of Māori art, definitely. Yeah.
Put your microphone up here.
All right.
So,
I'm doing this under duress, you realise. I said I'm going to behave and just do whatever Reuben tells me to do until I disagree. So that's all good. You can't?
you have to put it there.
Oh.
Right to you.
Okay. I'm not repeating that. Okay.
So often people talk about the Gordon Tuvey generation as being the superintendent of the Department of Education,
Yeah.
as the person who was one of the... is that better? So we often hear about Gordon Tuvey as Tovey.
Yeah.
Okay, they're saying that needs to go to your mouth.
I'm sure I can shout louder than this, but anyway.
Shout louder then.
No, go.
So Gordon Tovey?
Tovey.
Tovey. God. Is often acknowledged
Yeah.
as the, I don't know, one of the founders, I guess, in a way, or the, what would you call it, the person who is responsible for helping to form the contemporary Māori art movement. And I spoke to you about that, and you disagree with that.
Yeah.
Could you talk about Pene's involvement in that project?
I have a huge respect for Gordon Tovey. He was a great friend, but he was involved with art education. So it was about programs that were continued in schools, and then the Māori Arts program was considered, and we helped implement all our Māori that were advisors, but we weren't Māori advisors, we were just advisors or specialists at the time. So we were there to deliver information for school programs, for teacher training, and while we were engaging, like Cliff and Para, all of us, in introducing that program, that we started to get together on marae just to hang out. And then we started our own having exhibitions in the dining rooms. And that's really, when you talk about for Māori artists, Māori advisors at the time, we would just happen to, well, we were Māori, but so the group, when they talked about us as the Tovi generation, we were the Tovi generation as art specialists for schools. But when it came to us focusing on our own art and considering engaging in an art form that was around us but wasn't part of our practice, because when we went through, secondary schools, I was at Charity College, but I was still painting vases of flowers and, apple trees and things. I wasn't doing any Māori art there. They just gave us a program that was expected to get through school certificate. So then when I went on and to Teachers College, it was the same thing. I was engaging in art practice that was European. And up until the point that we then became as a group, and I know Cliff and Pata said, well, let's go up to Te Kā and let's work on over the Christmas period and just hang out and enjoy, because even though we were placed in different regions, I was, in Napier and in Gisborne. Cliff, I think, was in Wanganui. Pata was in Hamilton, so it wasn't, that became really the having a focus on being Māori. I think it was that, and ensuring that where we were engaging was at marae. And eventually, I know I switched to Māori art because of a request by Dame Georgina Kirby, who was a cousin, and there was a Pacific Arts Festival that was happening in Rotorua, and she rang me up and she said, look, we've got an exhibition there. There's no kahungunu artist. You're to do an artwork for that festival. So I thought, oh, it's a Pacific Arts Festival. I better be Maori, and that's what I did. So I looked at what I was doing, advising on secondary teachers to have their students working on just simple repeat patterns, koru repeat patterns. It was just, they had to do that, because if they presented, a folio and it didn't cover, they didn't have any evidence of Māori art, then their chances of achieving, the teachers knew it was, it jeopardised their means, because it was in the syllabus and a requirement for school certificate. So I used the patterns that I was teaching them as an introduction for my own work, and went to the festival and people related to it. And I thought, oh, okay, and we as a group were getting together, we felt good about, that we were showing artwork that related to Māori. There was Ray Hammond, I remember being there, and he looked at our work and didn't like it. Ralph Walker's not going to be pleased with me, but because Pinea Taipa's brother was John Taipa, and he was at the Rotorua Institution doing the carving there, and their students came we were in the next big auditorium where our exhibition was, and I remember he stood at the door and he yelled at his students for them to get out of here because all this artwork was rubbish. It was, but all that becomes challenges. In the end, you think, oh, okay, your heckles go up, and we enjoy doing what we're doing. So, yeah, that's how that Gordon Tovi generation was. That once we did that, and with Pene, and we would run courses in Tiki Tiki. I remember the secondary school, Ngata College, Te Araroa, and he would come and support what we were doing, and just having that influence of someone like Pene to accept what we were doing, and especially when his brother wasn't thinking that way, and we needed that reassurance, and so we were very loyal to Pene, and anything he told us, it became like the demand of us to share how he approached his work, how he prepared himself, but as well as that, I remember him standing on a log at his little whare down in a valley at Tikitiki, and he'd just go into a chant, and he'd chant and chant. Then he'd get on, and he's climbing onto the log, and he puts his foot out and he swings the adze in time with his chant, and it just goes whack, and he puts his foot on top of that chip, and then he just keeps chanting, and he moves back each time, and that adze was on full swing, and you realise, okay, the chant isn't just about what it was giving as the modi of the piece that he was doing, but it was also part of the timing, his preparedness for ablutions in the morning, and he said, you have to respect our art and the traditions that it's come from. And so, see him do that, and you just felt it, you knew, and even just eating in the house was a ritual. And yet it wasn't an imposed ritual, you just did it, you sort of see what he was doing, and you felt the respect that Pene was offering us by allowing us to see how he engaged in his mahi. So that's why, from then on, for me, Pene was the one that brought the group together, and we continued to then and we were still exhibiting in when we had our Ngāpuna Waihanga New Zealand Māori art as an artist hui, with putting exhibitions into the dining room. And I remember it was Te Ao Mutu, and a gallery person or a mainstream came and asked us, he liked what he saw, and he said, I'd like to exhibit your work in our gallery. And we said, oh, okay then. And then he said, if you send some work in, we'll select some out and we'll put up the exhibition. And we all looked at each other. We said, no, we're not going to do it. We said, if we send work in, it's our choice to give you the work. It's not your choice to decide what's good and not bad, because the measure that you're going to be using is a Pākehā one.
He applied that to me too, even though he was one of the people who trained me on how to curate Māori art exhibitions.
Yeah. But I mean, as I said, we respected Pene so much. So whatever he offered, however little, became a big thing. It just the way he'd take us into his best tukutuku, what he saw in the whare at Hauiti in Tolaga Bay, and he explained why these panels were superior to others. And he talked about the balance of the width and the repeat, the width of the whare from one side to the other, the amount of the thickness of the strip that made the crosses, the angle of the crosses, that they weren't like that, they actually had to be elongated because of the toe. So he said this was what would acknowledge for him a superior offering, an engagement. And the same thing happened when he was doing carving. You'd go to another whare, ko whaiwhai, you go to another one. And he said this one here, and he talked about, and I mentioned in that publication, about this twinkle. And and it's just the end of the quarter in the way it went back in. And if you know how to do it, you've got to go into the centre of the quarter, but you've got to go back along that line before it breaks. A lot of people go in and break straight away, and it doesn't have what he calls his twinkle. So, and it really was just allowing you to appreciate the value that he placed in the way that the shape filled the space. Each one because you'd say, okay, here's the space here. Remember, you have the positive pattern, which is the Koru pattern. The background shapes are exactly the same dimension, but you can break that background shape into red and black. It becomes red and black negative shape, but it's still the same amount of space as the koru. So little things like that allowed you to then, as you're working with any area, you divided the space, you knew the thickness of the line that needed to be there because of the way he placed that importance on just the shape of the koru and how he said there is a standard to the type of work that you do. And, and immediately, but then the other good thing was that he also said, but you'll know the patterns that I've done, my heke or whai. He said, because if you can find where the design repeats itself and there's one area that's not repeating, he said that's my pattern. He said, and that's when he said, this pattern doesn't control me, I control the pattern. It's my, showing of myself. So, that became something that you realized that you needed to have. You look at the tradition, you look at the structure, but then you have to be able to believe that you can move that pattern in another way out of respect. And for us, it was for Penny, so we always did that.
Well, that actually is. Can we bring the screen back up? Yeah, thanks. These series of paintings here you spoke about, as well as hating them.
Well, I hated them now because after all this time they were, they're stacked and be in the shed somewhere. I had to restore them all. And we were, at the time, we didn't have canvas, so we just had hardboard and we put a bit of muslin on and pretended it was canvas and we, covered it. And of course, when I went to wipe it, it all sort of started to come off, and so I had to, yeah. So no, I didn't say I hated it. I may have said that to you. Perhaps I was getting tired of talking to you or something. I don't know. Yeah.
But you spoke about breaking away from, not being controlled by the form, and this, in terms of these being your earliest kind of explorations of controlling the form.
But also this one, this series, the form series, was also looking at colour. I was brought up on colouring in books. My grandparents used to send out to the farm regularly colouring in books and and all the coloured pencils and crayons. And of course in those days, even now, if you're allowed to do that, but you're not, that it's how you drew to the line. So you respected each space, even though the images were European images, of a puppy dog or something. All it was a space that you filled in a colour. It's the colour that you selected to go alongside it, the shade of the colour that you ended up, you enjoyed, you felt good about one of the pages that you coloured in, as against another one where, as soon as you went over the line, you couldn't repair it, you lost interest because, so you went on to the next one. That's why the grandparents had to keep sending me colouring in books, but I wish they had also sent me blank pages so I could draw my own. But, that was the time. So, yeah, these ones are about using colour. It is still the form of an S and C shape and the reversal, but the form for me was Māori. And I used the colours to allow me to enjoy colour. And, that's been part of most of my paintings. So colour has been the emotive side for me and how the works would be considered.
And so, moving on from those, you have a similar kind of practice where you're focusing real intensely at the centre of an image and really pushing ko whai through a kind of a gauntlet of possibilities as much as you could do, removing it, reshaping it. I'm not sure if you guys can see this image here. It's a bit of a dark one, but you'll see it in the show. Oh, can you turn the closest one? There you go, that's a bit better. So in the first gallery, there is a series of really quite swirling is the best kind of word I can come up with, where the image is focused, concentrated on the centre of the image. And
Now what happened, I started with a square because it was similar to the repeat unit of a heke, the patterns in the meeting house. And so, I wanted to fill the form, and I thought, in a meeting house, the forms are so simple, in the repeat pattern. And I thought, why is it so simple in comparison to the complexity of the carving patterns, and also, with the tukutu design? But for me, it also allowed, I think, for a balance, to allow the carving to sit strongly, and for the tukutu. But I thought, if I worked on the design and looked at other opportunities, then I wanted to explore the square, and then I went on to the circle. So all that happens is that on a square, you use a koru, you come off a straight edge. You can bring it, but at some point to get the repeat, you have to connect to an edge. So that was on the square. When it came to the circle, I needed the patterns to then use the form of the circle, and that controller. But and for me also, when we talked about the balance, when Pene talked about, the tapu no balance, that with a circle especially, there to create a circle, we didn't have the means to cut a circle, so it had to be in the square. But I wanted to be sure that I respected the outer space. So and it was part of it, and the width and everything had to be in proportion to what not only the size of the circle was, but the size of the koru that I was putting to do these swirls. So, I took it to the outside to remind people and myself that the outside space is part of the painting. Because I remember once there was a square one it went to Germany to be printed, and it came back and they cut off they reduced the painting back to the square, and the outside edge wasn't there, and it just blew the whole offering, because it needed the space on the side to have the quietness to allow the energy of the shapes and the strength of the colour to sit comfortably. I didn't want it to be on the wall along paisley wallpaper or something. It wouldn't have worked. So it is that it's a consideration to composition with all the works.
And that same kind of balance, I guess, with having the big border frame and the kind of focus on the central image carries through into a lot of these works from the 80s. So you'll see in the long thin room at the back, a series of works that have a lot more kind of figurative imagery in them, but they still have that frame on the outside. There's that same kind of design principle that is inherent to kōwhaiwhai. I think that's something that's really important to understand the design principles of kōwhaiwhai as a part of New Zealand art history. I think there's been a lot of talk about different artists using kōwhaiwhai. But we actually don't have a lot of recognition of Māori artists and how Māori artists understand or... oh, look, we're people now.
Oh, great.
No, never mind, that bro's too bright. And so then you move on to this more kind of figurative series. And I think you mentioned that at the time, the Anglican Church, was it the Anglican Church that had been gifted some land in Wairua?
At Mohaka.
Mohaka.
Yeah. And then the church had to be demolished because it was unsafe. And then they wanted to sell the land off. And, we said, no, you should be giving it back to the people. It was gifted to you, not as something that you then looked at making a buck from. And there was other issues that I was 4 years at Charity College, so I went to, church every morning and twice on Sunday. So by the time I left there after 4 years, I was over it, and so I wasn't necessarily sympathetic to, and especially when we were doing our art. And I remember at one of the churches in the cathedral in Gisborne, and they asked us to do some tukutu and kōwhaiwhai around the altar. by whatever the name of the person who leads the church there, and then when we did this, and they had a meeting, they could have had the meeting beforehand, but they allowed us to put it up, and then we were questioned by the congregation as to why the church was displaying heathen images, and it's sort of and I thought, you're just thinking about this cathedral in the main street of Gisborne, but on Awapuni Road, just on the outskirts, there was a church there that was fully carved like Tiki and had all the artworks in there, and it's the same religion. It's accepted there. What is it? Is it because it's deemed to be a Māori church? Even though it's the same religion. And when we looked at the cathedral and the ask, then it wasn't. It was a means for them, and I say it this way, it wasn't all the congregation, it was just some, to have a go, and just say, well. And the same thing happened with the church at the hospital, where they were asked to do some tukutu designs, and I created the designs, and Women's Welfare League, Māori Women's Welfare League did them. And the same thing, they said they were uncomfortable. Maybe that one is a little bit different because all denominations were in the hospital, but the one that, with the Anglican one, we were asked by Anglicans to do this pattern. So there were issues, and there was a number of things where I started to create images that virtually said it was not always a positive for us who are especially going through Te College and Sunday school. My aunt used to have that, and you came with this, this belief. But I also said I don't trust adults now anyway. As soon as I knew Father Christmas wasn't real, I thought they lied to me, And so it's just a way of saying you have to start thinking for yourself as to what you believe allows you a freedom to do something. So, yeah.
And from moving on from that series of thank you. That series of works.
That's my niece.
Thanks, Anna. Kia ora.
She governs everything I do. I call her they're like elder abuse now. I'm not allowed to do it anyway. But anyway, go on.
And so you have this understanding of how ko whaiwhai tukutuku works in terms of balance and form and shape and movement, and then you move into this series of here, which kind of happens in the 80s, kind of early 90s, where you kind of, it looks like you throw it all away and break the frame, but actually there's a similar design principles going on still.
Yeah. But this was as a result of meeting extended whānau who had left Pāhuera years before, and my grandmother, and it was just my grandmother and her sister, and they came to live in, and one of her sister stayed and married into the Winiata whānau, and then and so Mum and Dad knew them, but we didn't. But we always saw their names listed on all the land holdings back at Pāhuera. And so we had a reunion and we invited them to come up. They became good friends, but we talked about the fact they were part of our whare, our hapu, and they were not, they hadn't been there for years, or their descendants. And so that one was about how, your own whare can be dismembered, really. And for us, as we do with whakapapa, Mum said you make sure you say hello to early relations, they'll never let you forget it. And so that connection was the reason I went into that series. Then what I liked, it was done at a marae at Otaki, the first of that particular series, and I gave it to them. But I thought, this offers a way of going away from a traditional form of the whare and then dismembering it and then putting it back together in a format that allowed direction, lines, connections of colour. It just became another means of doing an artwork. Not just another means, an important means for me.
What I really like about these is that the frame that you spoke about earlier ends up being broken and then gets cast kind of through the imagery and becomes part of it. So you still have that kind of balance. From there, I want to move on. I don't want to talk about Te Huki too much because I'm going to leave some of that to Robert Yonke later in the next talk. What I wanted to talk about is the whare moi on the left.
Yeah, Heneringa.
On your right. Heneringa. So you have Te Huki, which is the larger meeting house, which the first meeting house you designed. And then we have Heneringa next door that was built in the late 1800s.
Yes.
And it was at the mouth of the Mohaka River, and it was a house of midwifery, but also was used for people who were going along the Wairoa to Napier Coach Road and were unable to cross the river when it was too turbulent. And when you look at this whare, there's this amazing combination of different influences. So you've got the influences of Te Koti and the Pai Mariri when they came through in the 1860s. And they weren't nice incursions. They were battles. But there's this really interesting relationship in that area, particularly if you know about the net of Te Huki, the ancestor who connected a lot of the iwi from the Tairāwhiti all the way down to Raupunga through different kind of strategic marriages. But when you look at this whare, you see these figurative images, you see ko whaiwhai, and then you see these quite beautiful blue, red colours coming through in this house. And when did you upgrade? You did the renovations on this in maybe 86?
Yeah, in the 80s. Yeah.
And what I thought was really interesting is that if you look at the colours of this house, a lot of it is a really similar colour palette to a lot of the works that you had done during that period. But I don't want to go so far as to say that this was the basis of that practice, but I just found that really interesting, particularly when you look at the whare at Te Papa, where you see those similar kind of colours coming through, the similar shapes, similar patterns. So you'll all know this whare. And I'll get Sandy to talk a little bit about the process of creating it. But what I thought was really interesting is that we actually have what I think is a Mohaka style of painting and ko whaiwhai that comes from this small, ornate, beautiful little whare that's now at our National Museum. And a lot of I think the Toi Koru students who came through in that period have a similar colour. Like everyone who studies with me knows Koamaru blue, turbo yellow, red berry. We all, except for in Hastings, we ran out of red all the time. But I thought that was really interesting when you talk about being a colorist, and then there's the influence from that whare. And for me, particularly working in an art gallery now, realizing there is this really long history of painting in New Zealand that we don't, or I guess we haven't yet to really kind of to delve into further. But also I know that, was anyone here present involved in the creation of that whare? No, they're outside talking, they're eating food. But could you talk a bit through the process of how that commission came about?
Okay, you heard June, those who heard June go on and on and on with about we are now overseas travel. We did those projects to earn the pute, to take the students overseas. So and there was a number. We did the same thing with backdrops for the Matatini festivals. Same thing, purely to have pūtea because they were young students. They did, and the families didn't have the money. So that was how we engaged. But the other thing, you had to work out a way of creating something for a large area in the workshop at Toi Koru. And so, everything had to be down to an 8x4, virtually, custom wood panel. And you designed it we had to design it in sections. You can do the angular one, but it's still just an 8x4 going up. And the designs were part of what we were engaging in at Toi Koru, with the considering the patterns of that area, the colours of that area too. And so it's you're not necessarily aware of that this influence was there. You just did what was needed to offer the best at that particular time. And I think all of our work was based on, and the students they were so used to working as a team, and they were prepared to. I know that with Derek and Steve, when they did the carvings for hikurangi, same thing, the teams just worked through the night, and the commitment was because it was an important tahi, and it needed to offer the best for us. So it's a standard that you look at, but it's also how do you achieve a big space with a workshop that you can only do a certain amount. So I remember Henare Tahuri was the one that had to do all the angles of the triangles, and he was a master. He created his own little workshop type machine to cut these. So the learning was a shared one, and I thought, and I think that's what Māori art, the essence of a lot of Māori art is when we say it's a people's art, we engage everybody in the process. And that's one of the things that I know that for mainstream consideration of artists and their work, it's about the individual. And, the individual works that are created, they can see and understand and respond to that. When they're looking at Māori art, then they have to look at a collective, and it takes them out of their comfort zone because they can't see what we have as the essence of the Māori that needs to be there, the importance of why it exists, how it relates to a hapu. It has to have identity, and we do that because we enjoy being together. I've been doing this job for a long time because I really enjoyed it. I love working with the students. Everything that they do, you see something new, they respond, and they motivate themselves because their colleagues around them are doing the same thing. I remember going somewhere to one of the art schools, and they had their own separate booths. I thought, no, we can't work like that. We have a big open space, the tables all together, and they're, sitting alongside each other. The environment for us is what I believe makes our method of working relate to that whanaungatanga, and knowing, I was up at the small village, and not even that, we had nothing there. Tennis courts, I think, was the only thing we had in that area. But everybody related, they were all through the road, and whatever we did there, we did together, and it was a good environment. You enjoyed the environment. So for us, when we set up Toi Koru and Toi Mārangi, we had to create the environment of that group type of working, and that doesn't sit comfortably with mainstream because they don't, and it's not their job anyway, is to acknowledge it. It's our job to create spaces that allow us to do that in our own right. So that's hence, when I looked at Pātaka, first thing I thought, well, I tried this and that didn't work, and you move to another offering. So that exhibition in there is like a whare. That's the first thing I do. I'll walk into a space and I say, how do I make this into a shape that is similar to a whare so I know where the balances are? I know where the front wall of the whare is. I know where the back wall of the whare is. I know where the works on the side have to be broken up into what would have been the whakairo, the carving, the tukutuku, and then the kōwhaiwhai going over the top. Each has its own role to play in the environment where we have our art, our gallery. And so that's what I tend to do as soon as I walk into a space. Hence I have to eliminate as much of the influences of the gallery. So let's take out no white. I don't, because the white just enhances the shape, of the added doorways and anything else, and hence the green and the black and the blue. I did have another arrangement there, but it was too difficult to attend to in the given time because there's a lot of mahi going here. But it allowed me to think, yeah, we're allowed to do that. And it sort of said, yeah, I found something that I can complain about. And it is, because it means that we have to find our own space. We're doing that in Hastings at the moment with the gallery there. We've had 2 exhibitions, our second one this year, for iwi Toi Koru, becoming, and it's really, they said, oh, who are the artists? I said, there's, first one, 35 artists, Māori artists. Oh, we could put their names. I said, the names don't matter. It's the number that matters, because for our ones at home and for the schools, they'll say, there's 35 Māori artists that are showing their work. This year we had 40. We say, it's a collective. This work isn't just about a selected number of artists. It's about Heretonga and the work that's there. So, I think that I accept, in a way, I've accepted the reason for why mainstream will, look at, say, images by Gordon Walters, and they say, oh, this has this Māori shape, and everyone can, if we're Māori, we say, yeah, it's a Māori form, but it doesn't have the controls that that mainstream curators have as an obstacle. It's been made innovative, and then all of a sudden, that artist is, with the work that's seen, I'm saying, yeah, but we use those shapes within our culture a hell of a lot more innovative and stronger than what Gordon is. He's picked on a format, and he repeats it like Mondrian does. It's just a way of doing that. But for us, I say, I think having the challenges gives you that extra, commitment to say, hey, come on, let's push it. So I look for the faults and say, yeah, see, they did that, and we need to do something about it. It just gives you an edge for ourselves to say our work is by us, for us, and it's our identity in the future. That's what we need to have. And the commitment by the younger ones, needs to be there. We were up at the marae at Massey, where Ngātai's marae last night. It was just stunning. And the work's out there. But Ngātai's at the back, he explained the work, and I said, so, but I said, I want to know how this image, and it's beautiful. The feeling of it is beautiful. But you need to tell us what is important about this whare in your eyes as the artist, because that becomes another step to allow us to then look for other opportunities where we can use and have that as a benchmark for us to say this is a statement of those young artists, what they've got now.
I think looking at this, these are the photos of some photos from Ngātai, from Te Raukaramu Marae, I should say, up at Massey. So there's a collective of artists who worked on it, and I think there is a defining trait, and I think probably all art practices have this, but it's, I think, just intensified with Māori art practice, this desire to be able to innovate, but within a set of design principles that are shared by the collective. And so you can innovate, but there is a schema that you are able to innovate in, and there's negotiations that happen within those kind of innovations. And the same thing happened, I think, when you look at the marae, rongo marairua on level 4 at Te Papa, and some of the whare that Bob and Ngātai and Nigel and Kura Te Waririwati will be talking about a bit later on as well. The other thing, just to wrap up, I wanted to, because you were talking about iwi toi kahunganu, a lot of people from my era at Toi Haukura, so we're going back to 2002, I was at Toi Haukura, and then I ended up at Toi Mairangi in 2003. So I did a few years in Hastings. But my era, we had this picture of what we thought Toi Haukura was. And it was people like Johnny Moitara and Johnny Pui and Henare and Tāwira who had set this particular style, and it had come out of the 90s. But when we moved to Hastings, Toi Mairangi was kind of free of, I guess, some of that influence. It was a bit different.
I had my own tribal group to argue with me, and you know, you move to another place, and plus I also said, you know, the influence of Steve and Derek with the reo and the kapahaka was an amazing strength that they had, and going to into Hastings and starting anew, and there were different type of student there. Toi Haukura were younger students, the ones in Hastings, because they didn't have a tertiary, you know, Toi could have been there for a while. And so we had older wives and things that came in, and so it was a different dynamic, and you worked to the pace of what you had, and yeah, it was a different approach.
So I'm just going to talk now because I think it's gone flat. Sandy's practice takes this dramatic change. You have that. Sandy's practice takes this dramatic change in the 2000s, where it gets real simplified down to these kind of core forms. And again, I started making these assumptions that the whare in Hastings may have influenced your practice.
Sounded good.
So if anyone knows Haungaria Marae, Ata Paki, the students, we went out there and we did a lot of renovation on the kōwhaiwhai there. And then just around the corner is Haungaria Marae. And some of the tauira got to work on the wharekai there, where Paramatchet has some works. But both of those whare have these very strong black and white facades. So there's these big kao chevron patterns on the front of the Mihiroa, and similar Haungaria has a similar kind of frontage, which is black and white, and so you have this huge kind of dramatic shift in your practice, which seems to align with those restoration projects.
Sure. Yeah, I didn't think of it at the time. Actually, the reason for these panels being done was that I entered a program at Massey with Bob for a Masters, and I was required to do an exhibition in the first year and an exhibition in the second year. So I looked for the biggest surface to fill a space, and these are doors from out of Bunnings, or, you know, because they're nice and light, and so I had to do things big. Yes, and I thought I'll be clever and I'll scratch into them, and I know Hui said, "Oh, that's really good." And I thought, "Oh, well, let's hope you can influence your husband to get to see that." So, but as I say, each thing has its reasons for why you attend to it in a way to get an outcome. And with these ones, but I carried on with it. I liked what I started to explore. And when I say I enjoyed what I was doing, and it allowed me to, a lot of the work, if it was something that challenged me all the time, I was happy to continue with it. My worst state, if things started to become too easy, if it was too predictable when I started, and I was, you know, progressing a painting, you'll see a few works in there that have this red splatter on it, and that was, if it worked too well, I'd get paint and throw it at it because it meant that I had to then attend to it, and it became a challenge, and it brought me back to be interested in the work. Otherwise, it was just, as I say, I didn't want to paint by numbers because you had to have like Phineas Twinkle and that change so that you then moved it on and you could engage, because it was something that required a certain response that you couldn't just do. You had to consider it. Are we finished yet?
I think we are finished. Damn, I missed one image. So with Phineas Twinkle, it's the little known design formula for the perfect koru. So if you look at, not picking on Gordon, I like Gordon Walter's paintings, but his aren't actually very good koru from a Māori perspective.
No.
They're balls with a line stuck to it. And Sandy's got a new pattern, which is the mango koru. Well, it's not a new pattern, it's specifically a kahangunu pattern, but I know you kahangunu folks are keen on it, where it is more of a pointed, kind of seed-shaped head rather than a circular ball. And there's a particular design pattern that Sandy's been working with, which I've nicknamed Sandy's Twinkle. So just keep that in there forever so we can call it Sandy's Twinkle. And if you have a look in the exhibition, there's a painting named Mango Koru that's in there that has that particular pattern. And then there's two paintings that were done this year, which are again a dramatic shift in your practice, which kind of comes back to colour again, kind of back to kind of where it started.
That was okay. So Reuben said it'd be good if you could do some new ones. Okay, what am I going to do? And then I thought, okay, I'll try this. So I did one, struggled over it, but and the focus is on colour, like the form ones, the very first ones. I looked at that and just created a koru pattern to divide the space. Then I did another one alongside it to be part of that same focus. I brought it down here and I stuck it on the wall and I looked at it, it doesn't work. So I took it away. So because I thought they're going to get, I'm going to confuse myself if I have one as a focus and then the next one was meant to be the same focus and it's not working. I don't want that to be something that then I'm stuck with, because it's been shown in a gallery. So but I know what I'm looking at, and it's for my retirement where I can enjoy myself again at my own pace. So that's what that is.
Kia ora.
Okay.
Thank you, Sandy.
All good.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you, I appreciate that.